or our participating sponsors.
The talk of Chicago and the voice of the nation is 1690 WVON, Berwyn, Chicago. Live from the Xfinity Studios at WVON. We're your original social media. You're listening to Inspirational Perspective with Linal Harris on 1690, The Talk of Chicago.
Change up the things you see. Open your mind to possibility. Find your power, passion, and purpose. You know it's time for you to walk with greatness. Let's murder mediocrity. Slay your goals, live out your dream. Let's live now. Inspirational perspective. Open your mind to a better life. It's time to live. Let's find your purpose now. Inspirational perspective. Let's slay your goals, let your greatness flow with inspirational perspective.
Good morning, Chicago. You're listening to Inspirational Perspective. I'm your host, Linal Harris, your very own life coach right here on WVON 1690 AM, the talk of Chicago. Inspirational Perspective on your radio is all about murdering mediocrity and living the best life possible. So as I ask you every Sunday morning, are you living the best life possible? And this is the place to be to explore that possibility. Well, good Sunday morning, everyone. An interesting day. The day after Independence Day. Maybe I should more like, I'm doing air quotes, Independence Day. Man, I'm gonna tell you something. This year, so I haven't been celebrating the 4th of July, I would say probably for the last 5 years. And for a very conscious reason. That's one of the things I want to talk about today. And by the way, you know, let me say this. This show is going to be one of those shows where people get upset. It's going to happen. But I want you to stick with me. Like, don't turn me off and say Linal said if you don't listen to the entire show. You don't get to do that. Because it's going to be one of those kind of shows. Like, I want you to really hear me out. You guys know I'm a thinker. So if I say I'm not celebrating Independence Day, I'm not doing that because it's a fad. I'm not doing that because I'm looking for attention. There's a reason behind this. I have a diverse group of people that listen. And what I'm going to say is, hear me out. Hear me out. And this is what I want to cover over the next 2 hours. I want to talk about the Black American experience. I've got a number of phone calls from colleagues and friends who aren't Black. And some of the cases I've done the best I could to explain my experience or to explain where I stand on a lot of the things that we've been talking about over the last 5 months. A lot of things we've been talking about over the last 5 years since the Mike Brown incident in Ferguson. But today's show serves as, and really, a comprehensive explanation of the Black experience, or my Black experience in America. I want to talk about the omitted history of Black America. There's a lot of things that people don't know on purpose And I think this is one of the reasons why often our brothers and sisters who don't share the same experience, and since they don't share the same experience, don't have the same perspective, don't necessarily understand where we're coming from. I want to talk about that. And I want to talk about Black America's complicated relationship with Independence Day. And why it's complicated, and why if you're Black, it should be complicated. And also why it should be respected. Now I'm gonna say this up front, that 2 hours don't do this topic justice. Because I'm gonna skim over, I'm saying all this up front, so people don't say, well, you should have went deeper there, Linal. Or you could have spent the whole show on that, Linal, because this is really just an overview of why I don't personally celebrate the 4th of July. And it could take more than 2 hours. I could spend probably 12 hours getting into the details and particulars of why, for me, this is a complicated holiday. So, for those of you listening, I've had a few clients who, they called me off the cuff outside of our normal sessions to say, what do I do about coworkers who are like, help me understand, help me get it. Now, what you can do is you can forward this show. When we finish, you'll see what I mean. You can forward, you know what, just listen to this. If you want to honor my experience, if you want to understand my experience, just listen to this. This is this show. And it's time. And so, this show is for any ally who truly wants to understand the plight of Black Americans in America. This show is for you. Now, if you're not an ally and you're not really trying to understand, it's going to make you a little angry, maybe a lot angry. And that's okay. I would have it that you feel something versus being different. And when you think about the American experience, I want you to think about yours. What is your American experience? Because they're all different. And one of the things we have to do is we have to respect those differences. And so this show may make you uncomfortable. It may make you incredibly happy, depending on your perspective, depending on your experience. And when I say happy, like, yes, somebody else gets it. Somebody else gets me. But remember this, that, and I've talked about this before, that typically offense with another person, if I'm offended with somebody, I'm offended because there's some level of ignorance that I have of their life experience, perspective, and more. And so if this show offends you, just consider now that maybe there's something you don't fully understand and you should seek to understand, because seeking to understand also equates to wisdom. Let's start with this. The brother James Baldwin. He said this: I love America more than any other country in the world. And exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually. American history is longer, larger, more various, more beautiful, more terrible than anything anyone has ever said about it. James Baldwin. And I start with that quote because I believe that it is, the perfect way to describe my own experience of these United States. I'm incredibly blessed. There's no question about that. I thank God for everything that He's blessed me with I thank God for all the opportunities that he's provided me as a consequence of having been born in this country. So I don't want you to get it mixed up. And to the veterans out there, no matter your background, I want you to know that I appreciate you. I appreciate your service. I think that you are some of the bravest men and women on the planet. And there is no way to repay the service that you have provided this country, and as a consequence has provided us, those of us who enjoy some of the freedoms, and my emphasis on some is real, some of the freedoms that this country offers. There is a privilege to that. Now, I don't want to overstep that. Now, I'll start by saying this. I've always been a student of history. I love history. My mother can testify to that. My wife can testify to that. Hey, baby, let's sit down and watch this documentary. Or what are you reading? You're reading that? Why? And today you're going to understand why. Because history tells a story that gives context to the present experience. And I want to talk about history. I want to start off with some history. And I want to take us back, not to 1619, because that's English history. That's English history. Because when we look at history, we have to look at all the different layers of history. And different people are writing different histories, and we have to layer them on top of each other and look at it all. Slavery, in terms of the institution of slavery that was born through capturing Africans, this institution began during the height of the Spanish Inquisition. I referred to that a couple of weeks ago in the 1400s. In Maitland Newitt's book, The Portuguese in West Africa, 1414 to 1670, he states how the Portuguese began raiding and kidnapping North and West Africans along the Atlantic coast. And this was the start, in many ways, of slavery to the Portuguese and the Spanish. And this slavery was maybe not in North America, but it was in the Americas, in the Caribbean nonetheless. And the first North American settlements had slaves. This is not talked about. Now, I want to say something real quick, because I had the opportunity to listen to the minister, Louis Farrakhan, yesterday. I have a huge amount of respect for him. And I have a huge amount of respect for wisdom. I have a huge amount of respect for leadership. And he is, and in my opinion, the only remaining black leader with a voice. So I listened to him. And I also saw the articles that led up to his broadcast on Saturday. And the names and the labels that he was given. And I want to say this because as someone who does my own research in history, I can't refute what he says. Now, how he says it, that's one thing, and that's his choice. But even as we talk about the Spanish Inquisition, we have to remember that people came to the Americas to escape religious persecution. And so that included Protestants, that included Muslims, and it also included Jews. In terms of how this system of slavery was perpetrated. Often they say the minister he's lying. He's not lying about that. And I just want to say that, because I think it's important that when we talk about history, these are facts. These are facts. But let's talk about North America, because a lot of what he's talking about took place in Brazil through the Portuguese in terms of what happened there, leaving Spain and the oppression, religious oppression in Spain, coming down the north and west coast of Africa, capturing people, and then moving on to the settlements of Brazil, etc. Okay, so that's a part of history. I think that's important. And it wasn't perpetrated long in some cases by certain groups, but it was perpetrated. Okay. Now, in 1526, enslaved Africans were part of a Spanish expedition to establish an outpost on the North American coast in present-day South Carolina. Those Africans, the reason you don't know about them is because they launched a rebellion in November of that year and effectively destroyed the Spanish settlers' ability to sustain the settlement, which they then abandoned a year later. Okay, so that's important to know, because there has been incidents of slavery before 1619. Why am I saying that? Because I'm just talking facts to this. I'm not trying to defend anything. I'm just talking facts. Okay, so nearly 100 years before Jamestown, Virginia, Africans enabled American colonies to survive. And they were equally able to destroy European colonial ventures as well, due to rebellions and things like that. So you got to remember, history has layers. We don't hear about these things. You want to understand why some of the horrors our ancestors experienced on these shores took place? Because they had to figure out how to control us. So, and by the way, this is, I'm going to quote my sources today. This is sourced by the Smithsonian Library. Also sourced by the Smithsonian Library. There is also suggestive evidence that scores of Africans plundered from the Spanish were aboard a fleet under the command of Sir Francis Drake. You guys know that name? That's one of the things we learn in history. We learn about Sir Francis Drake. And when he arrived in Roanoke Island in 1586, what they don't tell us is that Sir Francis had Africans on board. They don't tell us that part. He showed up and he did it all by himself. They survived all by themselves. Right? They don't talk about that. But the Smithsonian says there's evidence that scores, a score is 20. So when they say scores, that means a minimum of about 40. Okay? That scores were aboard. And so we have to be careful about making the history we know, or we think we know, the only history there is. There's layers to this, man. Portuguese layers, French layers, English layers, Dutch layers, German layers, more importantly, African layers. This is why I take people back to Ghana, to Africa, so they can get the African layer, right? Because if you're learning only the European layer, consider you don't really have the history. Go ahead, brother.
Do you think with, people burning these historic statues and throwing them in the water, do you think that there's an awakening coming about with the meaning of Independence Day?
Oh, the awakening has happened. This is a consequence of the awakening. I'm going to tell you something. This is one of those shows I wanted to have 5 years ago. I couldn't. You get where I'm going? Like people will be like, what is he talking about? Why is he talking like that? Why is coach saying this? I don't get it. I don't understand. Because there was a different level of understanding, but again, remember, this is a spiritual world, man. There's been a spiritual awakening. So this is why our brothers and sisters that don't necessarily look like us and share the same skin tone are willing to be in the conversation because of the spiritual awakening. Now, the history goes on. Let's move forward. Talking about 1586. Back to United States. 1619. Right, that's what we know, Jamestown. Then, in 1640, and by the way, all this is relevant. I want you to just follow me, man. An indentured servant, his name is John Punch. All this matters, by the way. He's sentenced to a lifetime of slavery. He was an indentured servant, and he's sentenced to a lifetime of slavery in Virginia for running away from a tobacco field. His children are also punished with the same status, lifetime slavery. Because he ran away, his children are also given the same sentence. His two white companions, wait, what? His two white companions, this is 1640, indentured servitude was not just black people, but white people as well. His two white companions that he ran away with are only given extensions of their servitude. Not life, but extensions. And this cites the first recorded time slavery is codified and legalized, Virginia. Now, Virginia, man, one of those states. Pennsylvania, one of those states too, bro. To this day. Get this, 1662. Virginia passes the hereditary state law. So then they officially say, oh man, children will have the same status as their mother. So that means if your mama was a slave, you're a slave. Now, why is that significant? Because that's when it became open season on black women, on African captives that were female. You say, why would you say that, Linal? Because that means if I am a slave owner, then I no longer have to take care of any children. I no longer have to claim any children that are born to an African woman who is my slave. Those children now become my slave. Folks, this is why sometimes when we talk about law and laws, we have to be careful not to say, well, it's legal. We have to always check with our spiritual fortitude and our conscience, man. Because you might say, how did these people get so far off? By the way, they were Protestants looking to escape religious persecution. And these same people began to persecute. 1705, back in Virginia. Slave codes define slaves as property. This is when we became chattel. Property and real estate. Which means that the African captive that is being brought to the United States of America is no longer, and by the way, it's not the United States of America yet, the colonies, they're no longer human beings. but you can consider them as property, as real estate. Meaning that if you own them, you can do as you wish. You can do as you wish with another human being. 1712, New York forbids free slaves from owning property. So now, if you're free, you have no way to solidify that freedom with wealth and equity. 1712, before the founding of this country, these are the sins that are being perpetrated against African people and people of African descent. In 1740, South Carolina, they passed the Negro Act, making it illegal for slaves, get this, to raise food. You can't grow food. You can't earn money. And you can't read. So now, what they've effectively done is made a group of people completely and totally dependent, because you stopped their ability to make an income, you've ensured their illiteracy, and they cannot feed themselves. We want to talk about systems. Like, these are systems that are being put in place before this country is even founded. Now, March 5th, 1770. Let's take a bit of a turn. March 5th, 1770, the Boston Massacre begins the start of the Revolutionary War. Who was at the middle of the scene? Who was at the middle of the scene at the very start of this country's effort and labor to become, quote unquote, free? A black man. But what I'm about to say next is going to shock you. Listen to this. So we all know that Crispus Attucks is a black man that escaped slavery and that was killed, the first casualty of the Revolutionary War. This is documented, right? But Crispus Attucks is also, by the way, he was protesting. He's also the first documented case of police brutality on this land. Now you might say, Linal, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? See, this is why you got to go to your history books. See, Crispus Attucks was about 6 inches taller than the average man in that era. They don't have his exact height, but he was a big man. And in the testimony at the trial, by the way, these British soldiers had to go to trial because they killed human beings. This is back in the 1770s. You see how they fixed it so that they could slow that down, right? But these soldiers, they had to go to trial. And the trial of the British soldiers that were indicted for his death, in this trial, they depicted Crispus Attucks as having a robust physique. And guess who defended the soldiers? Our future U.S. President, John Adams. And guess what John Adams said? This is documented. The future U.S. President, who acted as the defense attorney for these soldiers, he used Attucks' muscularity and his race in an effort to justify the British troops' fear of him. And Adams described Attucks as, quote, this is written, a stout mulatto fellow whose very looks were enough to terrify any person. His very looks were enough to terrify any person. That's from a trial. That's from a transcript of the trial via history.com. You can go look it up, Google it. So now, that's 1770. Fast forward to 1776, the Declaration of Independence. By the way, Inspirational Perspective is 9 years. Oh, as of yesterday. My first blog ever I wrote was about understanding the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights. You wonder why 9 years ago I was concerned with that. But the Declaration of Independence basically touts life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And we have to remember that this was written really for white men with land. It wasn't written for Africans who were captives, who were slaves. It wasn't written for other immigrants. It wasn't written for poor white people who worked the land of these rich white men. It was written for the landowners. 1777, Vermont is the first state to abolish slavery, 1 year after the Declaration of Independence. And 10 years later, this is when Thomas Jefferson begins his relationship with Sally Hemings, who was just 14 years old and a slave. I just saw a picture of one of his descendants, I think his great grandson, black man. So going back to that law where you don't have to worry about any responsibility for children you have from black African captives that are your slaves. Thomas Jefferson, one of our founding fathers, took full advantage of that. Not just him, but George Washington as well was a slave owner of over 100, said some slaves. Then, I'm gonna fast forward a little bit. Eli Whitney, he invents the cotton gin. Now, why is that important? Because you got to remember that slavery is about economy. It's about money. It's about greed. Almost everything that we have to fight against right now is about greed. That's what this structure, that's what this country in many ways was built on. We got to take a break. Let's keep going, man. Let's keep going to the top of the hour. All right, so Eli Whitney. He invents the cotton gin. Now, why is this important? Well, the grand irony of all this is that the person who provided Whitney with the key idea for the gin itself was a slave. This slave was known as Sam. And Sam's father had solved the critical problem of removing seeds from cotton by developing a kind of comb to do the job. What Eli did is he patented this idea in 1794. All right, so why is that important? Because now the Whitney estate made a lot of money off of black ingenuity. That's still going on too. Now, in 1814, Francis Scott Key writes the national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner. And we don't typically sing the third verse, but if you want to understand why black folks, why Colin Kaepernick is bending the knee during that song, just go read the third verse. Because in the third verse, Francis Scott Key basically shares his sentiments on what should be done with slaves that join the side of the British to fight for their freedom. 1821, the American Colonization Society of Quakers, they decide, hey, we want to send some of these freed black slaves to Liberia because they believe that black and whites, we can't live here together equally. So you go back home. And they also believe that a few free black men would undermine the institution of slavery. And so they were supported in sending them back home. 1828, this is when the stereotypes began, right? So now how do you subjugate a people? Well, one, you have to degrade them in their own minds. But when you have groups like the Quakers who are coming out saying, hey, this is wrong, shouldn't be doing that, well, that causes a stir. And so now you have to degrade these people in the minds of those who haven't taken a stand or those who don't necessarily have an opinion. What do? Well, you introduce propaganda. This propaganda began with minstrel shows that began to birth negative black stereotypes, things like blacks are lazy. This is in 1828 when black folks were working from sun up to sundown, but they're lazy. They started to make the connection between chicken and watermelons and big smiles and things like that we continue to see in racist stereotypes. Now, at this point in time, once you get to the 1850s, black folks start running. Okay? They start running. So again, to appease those who don't necessarily have an opinion, when I say those who were not slaves, those who were not captives, they came out with a term. Samuel Cartwright introduces a term called drapetomania, which is a mental illness for why slaves run away. Right? And you got to be careful when doctors start telling you, I'm not saying all doctors, but some doctors start telling you, hey, you got a problem. You got a mental problem, because if you were a runaway slave, you had a mental problem called drapetomania. Now, drapetomania was a conjectural mental illness that in 1851, American physician Samuel Cartwright hypothesized as the cause of enslaved Africans fleeing captivity. And by the way, this is out of Wikipedia. Contemporarily reprinted in Cartwright's article, he was widely mocked. His article on drapetomania was widely mocked and satirized in the northern United States. But it was definitely picked up in the South, and of course has been debunked since then as pseudoscience. But this is an important part of the edifice of systemic racism and scientific racism that began. Okay. So in 1860, slavery makes the South one of the wealthiest places in the world, valued at that time over $4 billion. Back then, that was a lot of money. 75% of the world's cotton is now coming from the South. Abraham Lincoln is the president, which leads to the Civil War. Now, people say, what was the Civil War fought about? Let's be clear. The Civil War was a power struggle. It was a power struggle. Slavery was part of the topic because of the economic benefits to the South. But it wasn't just about slavery. It was about slavery and power. Let's be clear. So Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation. Slavery ends on paper. However, slavery still exists until Juneteenth, 1865, in terms of what we just celebrated. But guess what came in 1865? Jim Crow. And the black codes. In an era that began basically the restart of slavery and a brand new level of systemic racism. And what's Jim Crow? Jim Crow is legal barriers enacted to impede the upward mobility of black people. Now, before the Civil War, and this is important, before the Civil War were the Seminole Wars. And this can't be overlooked. Because, again, they don't always talk to us about these wars, right? But the Seminole War was between the Union Army, United States, led by Andrew Johnson, another president and known racist. In the Seminole Wars, there were 3 different wars. This war was fought for territory in Florida. But it was also fought because many escaped slaves were living in this territory with the Seminoles. And many of the battles, this is documented, that the Union Army fought were with escaped slaves and Indians fighting side by side. I don't mean to say Indians, indigenous people fighting side by side. Native Americans fighting side by side. And the Union Army, they kept going down south to fight these wars, and they weren't necessarily seeing the financial support from the South. And so again, this is something that led to a lot of the conflict in Congress that pushed us towards the Civil War. That's important because you can't have slaves finding freedom just a bit further south, and they can go north, right? You got to cut this thing off. And so not only do we need the Seminole territory to control our slaves, but we need it too because it looks good. And that's why that happened. Okay. 1866, this is a great place to end the first segment before we go on to the top of the hour. The Ku Klux Klan is created in Stone Mountain. Saw a video of a group of brothers down in Stone Mountain yesterday, basically declaring their freedom, as they should. But when the Ku Klux Klan was created, so was lynching, fear, and murder. And that becomes the way of the South in terms of enforcing black codes that were imposed on supposedly a free people. No owning property, no conducting business, no buying or leasing land. If you take away man's ability to build wealth, how can he be equal? How can we be free? When we come back, more on why I don't celebrate Independence Day. You've been listening to Inspirational Perspective. I'm your host and life coach, Linal Harris, right here on WVON 1690 AM. We'll be right back after the break. Don't change that dial. Good morning, everybody. How you guys doing? Love to know what questions, what thoughts you have. Go to check it out. This is stuff we should know, man. This has been going on a long, long time, since the beginning.
The talk of Chicago and the voice of the nation. 1690.
So let me see if there's any questions here. Also, let me
Deadly nightclub shooting.
keep myself up.
Boy shot and killed. I'm Christopher Cruz. 2 people are dead, 8 injured in a shooting at the Lavish Lounge nightclub in Greenville, South Carolina. The sheriff's department says the shooting happened just before 2 o'clock this
it's too
morning.
loud.
Greenville County Sheriff Hobart.
All right, so that way we can talk. We can have a conversation. All right, so here, let me check out some of the questions you guys have, or thoughts or comments that you may have on the topic. I'm curious about whether or not this resonates with you. And again, I really want you to understand where I'm coming from. Stick with me, man. Stick with me. If you really want to understand the black experience in the United States of America, I'm breaking it down for you. I'm breaking down the history. Say, Linal, you might need to start a book club and expand your ministry, into a book club. Oh, man. We'll see. What I can do is I can tell you guys what I'm reading. Maybe I'll start putting it on the website so you guys can see what I'm reading. No growing food, no earning money. You can't learn to read. Linal, was all the history available via the Smithsonian? Is there a list of sources you can share with us? So, Smithsonian, history.com, Wikipedia. What I will tell you is, this is the beauty of being, in the information age. It's all available. It's all available. All you got to do is go Google. And I always check the credibility of the source. That's why I like things like the Smithsonian. That's why I like things like history.com. That's why I'm going to talk about a few books. I talked about the book, what's the name of the book? The Portuguese, 1414 to 1670. It's a phenomenal book that talks about, written by Madeline Newitt, that talks about how slavery and race in many ways got started. Because again, remember, race is a human construct. This is one of the reasons I try to avoid saying, black, white, in contrast, right? We're all brothers and sisters. I firmly believe that. But I also believe that we have different experiences in terms of how we experience this country. And I think that should be known. I think that's something we should be talking about. But hopefully that helps there. Yeah, Christmas Addicts, the first documented case of police brutality. Adams, yes. Even Nazi soldiers could get reprimanded for killing an otherwise healthy worker in a concentration camp. The motive was not justice. Hey, thank you for that link there, history.com. My brother put that link for you guys right there in the feed so you can read it for yourself. People can't care about or honor what they don't understand. That's right. Yeah, public education does need a complete rehaul. I think one of the reasons why people feel the way they feel, conduct themselves the way they conduct themselves when we share different perspectives is because many of us don't understand the history of the United States of America. We don't know. We weren't taught it. It's funny, when I was doing the research on Eli Whitney, there were people from Ohio, people from a few different states that said in their schools they had learned that Eli Whitney was a black man. They learned this in school. Like their school taught them that. They were blown away by the fact that Eli Whitney is a white man and he stole the concept from his slave and made lots of money off of it. By the way, Jack Daniels, we can keep going down the list of different things that we know that took place. Lisa Marie said, I was shocked when I moved up here and saw the amount of black people shouting Happy 4th. I'm not saying black Southerners did not, but our family never walked around in red, white, and blue and said Happy 4th of July. My dad was an African-American studies professor. There you go. So you knew the history. So we learned very early on that this day meant very little to black America. There you go. Yeah. Say black people turned up more yesterday than on Juneteenth. Let me tell you something, man. It's because we don't understand and we don't know. You ride through the west side of Chicago, and that's better than any fireworks display that you can see downtown. You just ride. Now, not everybody can ride on the main street on the west side of Chicago. But those of you who can, you know what I'm talking about. It looks like a federal holiday, because we just don't know, we don't understand. Let me see. I'm looking for more questions. Let's see here. Yeah, I saw lines coming out the liquor store at midnight. Yeah, man. It's not the day to turn up, folks. Yeah, they were allies in abolition. Leslie said, some black folks don't want to rock the boat and fight for what's theirs because they're concerned about their economic well-being. Blacks were already considered a commodity by whites. A commodity is something you buy. Corporate America has bought today's blacks. I'm going to talk about that. If I have time, I'm going to talk about that. Even my own corporate experience. You must assimilate in corporate America. You have to assimilate. In terms of your look, in terms of your sound, in terms of your speech, in terms of what you say. And I'm going to talk about that. Because it's another way that, in a lot of ways, our economic ability to grow is controlled. Okay, let's see. You know, the truth about the history will stir it up. The black community and people in general. History is taught in school is programming. That's right. That's right. Morning, Toussaint. All right, here we go. We're coming back.
From the Xfinity Studios at WVON. We're your original social media. You're listening to Inspirational Perspective with Linal Harris on 1690, The Talk of Chicago.
Some great comments. All right, let's go.
If you wanna be about it, come on, let's talk about it. Change up the things you see. Open your mind to possibility. Find your power, passion, and purpose. You know it's time for you to walk in greatness. Let's murder mediocrity. Slay your goals, live out the dream. Best right now. Inspirational perspective. Open your mind to a better life. It's time to live. Let's find your purpose now. Inspirational perspective. Let's slay your goals, let your greatness flow. With inspirational perspective.
All right, we're back. You're listening to Inspirational Perspective. I'm your host, Linal Harris, your very own life coach, right here on WVON 1690 AM, the Talk of Chicago. Today's topic, why I didn't celebrate Independence Day. I gave a few things for you to think about in terms of what you're listening to, so you got to go back to the beginning of the show. But ultimately, what I want to say is we all are different. Because we're all different, because we all look different, that means we have different experiences. And because we have different experiences, that means we have different perspectives. And because we have different perspectives, that means we see the world differently. And that should be respected. And so for those of you right now who may be tuning in, for those of you who may be joining the Facebook feed saying, what? You know, Linal Harris doesn't celebrate Independence Day? He doesn't celebrate the 4th of July? I'd ask you to just please be still for a moment. Listen to my argument if you want to understand me. If you want to understand people that look like me. If you want to understand our experience and our reality in these United States. Now, I started the show with a quote by James Baldwin. I'll do that. I'll share that quote again for those of you who may just be joining. because I feel like this quote is relevant to my experience and my perspective of the United States. There's no doubt that I'm blessed. There's no doubt that this country has been good to me, that this country has been good to my family. But this country has also perpetrated a great deal of evil against my ancestors, against my grandmother, against my aunt and uncles. That close, okay? Against my grandfather, against my great-grandfather, against my great-grandmother. And that has had an impact on me. It's had an impact on my life. Even to this day, as a black man, when I see police lights or hear sirens behind me, my response, my physiological response, is quite different from someone who doesn't look like me. To this day, I still experience a lack of fully feeling free. James Baldwin said, "I love America more than any other country in this world. And exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually. American history is longer, larger, more various, more beautiful, and more terrible than anything anyone has ever said about it." And today I want to talk a little bit about it. I want to talk a little bit about why you may misunderstand folk like me, who think like me, who talk like me, who say things like, "I didn't celebrate the 4th of July." Well, here's why. We continue. If you missed the first hour, I highly suggest you go back. The Ku Klux Klan is created in Stone Mountain, Georgia back in 1866. And they began a reign of terror on blacks that I would say the term terrorism doesn't even begin to quantify. Our good sister wrote the song Strange Fruit. Hanging. To talk about the many blacks that lost their lives due to lynching, due to the fear that the Ku Klux Klan instilled in black folks back then. But right behind that came the 13th Amendment. And we have to talk about the 13th Amendment because the 13th Amendment was ratified in 1865. And this is what the 13th Amendment says. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. You say, well, Linal, that's when you got your freedom. Really? Really? Let's talk about the exception. Except as punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, is a mouthful. It's a mouthful. See, because this led to the rise of the prison system that incarcerates black people at more than 5 times the rate of white people. And also, get this, profits off their unpaid or underpaid. And when I say underpaid, you might as well say unpaid, because giving somebody a quarter a day cannot count as payment. Or a quarter an hour, or 50 cents an hour, that cannot count as payment. That's an insult. You might as well just take it off the books. So after the Civil War, the 13th Amendment is ratified, and new offenses like malicious mischief, loitering were vague and could be a felony or a misdemeanor depending on the severity of the behavior or what they thought was bad behavior. And these laws sent more black people to prison than ever before. And by the late 19th century, by the 19th century, the country experienced its first prison boom. Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow. That's from her book, The New Jim Crow. So convict leasing and chain gangs were created. And by the way, they built many of the roads that we still drive on in the South today. They built many of the institutions, the places that we still see. And we also have to explore why the original Civil Rights Act of 1875 was declared unconstitutional. Because get this, like, United States of America did make an effort to do the right thing, right? They did make an effort. So they passed this act, the Civil Rights Act of 1875. But then people get upset, say, oh, wait a second. If you make blacks equal, that causes a problem for me. As a matter of fact, I'm a business owner, and I don't want black people to be able to come into my private establishment and be treated equally. That's unconstitutional. So the Supreme Court, in an 8-1 decision, declared sections of the act, the Civil Rights Act, unconstitutional on October 15th, 1883. The court held that the Equal Protection Clause within the 14th Amendment prohibits discrimination by the state and local government, but it does not give the federal government the power to prohibit discrimination by private individuals and organizations. So, the lack of civil rights persists for black Americans in the United States of America. So here we have it, the Emancipation Proclamation leads to the 13th Amendment that leads to a lack of freedom for many black men. And by the way, you got to know, and this is history, it's documented, if you were a black man walking down the road all by yourself, nobody around, you could be kidnapped, convicted of a made-up crime because your word means nothing, and thrown on a chain gang. Many people lost their sons, lost their fathers, lost their husbands to sentencing. And by the way, we're not talking about 5 years, 10 years. We're talking about lifetime sentences to chain gangs, where many died in custody right here in these United States of America. People who look like me, my great-grandfather, people that look like him. So the court held that the 13th Amendment was meant to eliminate the badge of slavery, but not prohibit racial discrimination in public accommodations. So the Civil Rights of 1875 was the last federal civil rights bill signed into law until the Civil Rights Act of 1957, that was enacted during the civil rights movement. So think about that, 1875 to 1957. Somebody do the math for me on Facebook. How many years was that we had no civil rights in this country? Again, you want to understand why I don't celebrate Independence Day. You might say, well, you have civil rights now, Linal. Keep listening. Keep listening. There's a game called the African Dodger that was played in the South, where, oh, by the way, the African Dodger, let me tell you what the name of it really was. Hit the nigger baby. Yeah, I said it. Because I think we need to understand in historical context how crass and ugly this was. This is introduced at carnivals and fairs where white customers would throw baseballs at live black human babies. This is 1881, folks, in these United States of America. 1890. The states legalized voters' rights discrimination. So black folks had the right to vote coming out of slavery. Then in 1890, they back off that. No, man, we can't have that. Too many of y'all getting into Congress. You know, imagine one of these white congressmen sitting next to Robert Smalls in Congress thinking we got to get rid of this. We got to stop this. We got to stop this. So they put a stop to it in 1890. So now you have to own property and be able to read to vote. Well, remember, black folks couldn't own property. And by the way, you made sure they were illiterate. And owning land, leasing land, is illegal. So 6 years later, the Supreme Court affirms blacks are separate but equal in Plessy versus Ferguson as a result of that. Separate but equal. Now, this is when we started making our own moves. 1905, Lift Every Voice and Sing was written. But at the same time, and by the way, Black Wall Street is thriving in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People is founded by W.E.B. Du Bois. And we see the need to take action. We see the need to take action. By the way, people felt about the NAACP the same way they feel about Black Lives Matter now. Like, some things don't change. Then, 1932 to 1935 is the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. You don't know about that, go Google it. 400 blacks are observed over 40 years and never told they were given syphilis. They were never told. 40 years. Think about how that spread through our community, how that hurt the health and well-being of our community. Perpetrated right here in these United States of America. Never apologized. No one ever apologized for that. I don't think we would expect it. They haven't even apologized for slavery. No one's apologized for slavery. And the first public housing project opens in Atlanta. The first public housing project opens in Atlanta. But notice, it's not a ghetto, right? This is for white people and white people only. That's relevant. Then we go to war. And what do? What do black folks do? Here's an opportunity for us to be seen as equal. I can take a bullet. White man can take a bullet. I'm going to go to war. I believe I'll be respected after that. The uniform, man, people will respect me. World War I. World War II. I mean, we can go through the wars that African American, we served in every war of this country. That's why, if you wonder why do you say these things? Because we can. Because we can exercise our rights. We fought for them. So, 1950. 1950. Let's talk about the 50s. Because the 50s came after the Great Depression, and we got to talk about the Great Depression. Because after the Great Depression, everybody's poor, man. Most normal Americans, there's no middle class. They're poor. So what does the United States of America do about that? Well, they say, well, look, we want to help folks out. This is in the interest of the country. But we don't want to help everybody. So developers, they go to the Federal Housing Administration in the 1950s. And they're able to secure federal grants, federal dollars, federal loans If this is documented history, folks, you can read about this in Richard Rothstein's book, The Colors of Law. If you don't believe me, read about it. The Colors of Law by Richard Rothstein. What he says in the book is that the Federal Housing Authority. Now, mind you, this is in the time of, this is 1950. My grandmother is 99 years old, been paying taxes her entire life. Been paying federal taxes. Federal taxes are taken to build housing divisions. Federal money is taken to build housing divisions that it is explicitly said and documented to this day could not be sold to blacks. Could not. And they even went as far as placing a clause in the deeds that said upon resale of this home, you cannot sell and you cannot rent to a black person. 1950s. And get this, these statements are still in place on these deeds to this day. Ask me again why I don't celebrate the 4th of July. What's the consequence? What's the consequence of that? Severe wealth inequities. Severe. Working class blacks who could afford these homes weren't just denied the homes. My grandmother, right? Your grandmother, if you look like me. Your grandfather, if you look like me. Hardworking. Hardworking. You can't get in that house. By the way, these houses are going for $10,000. Worth today upwards of $300,000, $500,000. So what's the consequence? Today's black income is 60% that of a white person due to policies like this. But get this, wealth for a black person is 10% that of a white. You ask me why I don't celebrate. I don't celebrate because systemic racism still exists. Unconstitutional federal housing policies like this prohibited black wealth. And this has never, I repeat, this has never been remedied. Never. Again, you can learn about this by reading The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. 1960, four brothers sit down in Greensboro to protest the inability to eat, the inability to be served in private places. And as the movement begins, as people begin to protest, so does the scrutiny of black leaders. Medgar Evers is assassinated in front of his home. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is killed before going to address the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. I'm sorry, no. Birmingham was the bombing of the four little girls. Dr. King was in Memphis. We know that. And by the way, the four little girls that were killed in that bombing, there were 5 white men involved. Only 2 of them have been convicted, and they weren't convicted until 38 years later. 1964, we get the Civil Rights Act. After all this death, after all this carnage. I mean, I can go down a list of black civil rights activists that lost their lives, but I only got 30 minutes left. I want to make the best of my time. So again, I told you I would skim on some things I should go deep on. Malcolm X is assassinated, 1965. 1966, the Black Panther Party for Defense is founded. Now you get why? Now do you understand why? And by the way, they were founded due to police brutality taking place in our streets in our neighborhoods. And so they were founded to protect people that look like me. Fast forward later, the founder is assassinated in his bed by the FBI. And you ask me why I don't celebrate the 4th of July? Today, blacks are 2.5 times more likely to be killed by police than anyone else. The imprisonment of black men is 5 times higher than that of whites. For women, 2 times higher. And in many ways, we see now the injustice and the lack of a voice that we have as a people being displayed in the killing of our men in the streets. In my reading, I read about Mike Huckabee and how he talked about how when you look at the numbers, and this is what a lot of people will say. That's why I want to cover it. When you look at the numbers, you know, more black people aren't being killed than white people. Why? How can you say that black people are being treated unfairly? Well, black people make up 13% of the population. White people make up 60% of the population. And so when you look at the numbers and they look like they're 50-50 almost. I'm sorry, that's in terms of incarceration. When you look at the numbers, I believe it's 24%, correct me if I'm wrong, 24% of all police killings are black people. But then when you start to dive into how many black men are actually on the street, right? Because it's 13% of us, but only 6% of us, only about 6% of us are available, right? That you know, black 6% of black men are, in terms of the population, 6% of the population are black men that are whole and free in these United States of America. And so then when you see the numbers of death by police for black men, it's alarming. 2.5 times more likely to be killed. So then you have Ferguson. You have Trayvon Martin. Mike Brown. And I could read down the list of the many names. But if we just look at 2020. But now I want to go to 2019. Elijah McClain. Young 23-year-old black man. Walking down the street. I mean, you see the pictures of this young man. They can't even find a bad picture. You know how often with Mike Brown, they found one of them looking angry, right? Put that in the media. This is Mike Brown. But they can't even find a picture like that for Elijah McClain. Just a sweet young man. Just a sweet young man. Brutalized and killed by police. Ahmaud Arbery. I hear people saying, well, what was he doing in the house? Doesn't matter. Everybody has a right to live. Everybody. And then George Floyd. Wait. Breonna Taylor. Don't want to forget about that. Breonna Taylor. Killed in her own home. And then George Floyd. Let me, you know, you can't even. Are you surprised that I'm not in a celebratory mood? Are you surprised? How can I celebrate? When, as I look around, people that look like me they don't have the opportunity to practice the freedom. Let's fast forward 2020. I want to talk about my professional experience as a corporate executive here in these United States. See, I think sometimes we don't really get it. You know, and I want to speak for corporate executives right now, because a corporate executive works for one of these Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies. They can't come on Facebook talking about why they don't celebrate Independence Day. They don't have that kind of freedom. Now, if you're white, I'm talking about a black executive. If you're white, you can. You'll get to work and they'll go, "Oh, Bob, what's going on, man? Why you causing so many problems?" They'll talk to you about it. But in a lot of places, man, you're a corporate executive. You say something like this, you get marked. That's how you feel? Okay. You get marked. See, when you're black in corporate America, you have to hide your level of growth on all levels. I remember mentoring someone. I said, "Hey," they say, "Hey, man, I want to go grab a new car." I said, "There's rules to this if you want to be successful." See, you talk about there's code, there's rules, man. I keep saying there's layers to this. You don't want to drive better than your boss. It's not a good look if you're a black man. If your home looks nicer than your boss, you might not want to be putting your home on Facebook Live. You might not want to do that. You might not want to do that. Are you really free? Are you really free? Right now, are you free to speak at work, share your voice, say what needs to be said? And I get, by the way, I get that many CEOs across America now are creating the forum for dialogue. But when communication is one of the main major ways to build relationship and grow, why are we just now creating avenues for dialogue? So then you have to wonder, what has been the experience of the black employee before now? Are you free to speak? Are you free to share your mind? Here's what I think. I mean, in an uninhibited way. Can you do it, or will you be misunderstood? If you get too passionate, you might be considered angry. Are you free? What's your American experience? They're all different. We got to respect those differences. So then you wonder why Colin Kaepernick would take a knee during the Star-Spangled Banner. Oh man, that's disrespectful. But let's talk about the disrespect of a people. The brutalization of a people. The dehumanization of a people that has never been apologized for. That has never been addressed. Like James Baldwin says, I love my country, and because I love my country, one of the things that I have to do is I have to criticize it. I love my wife. Because I love my wife, I have difficult conversations with my wife. Baby, this is not working. We got to change this. We got to change that. Because my wife loves me, she has difficult conversations with me. So right now, I don't care who you are, but can you be in a difficult conversation about these United States of America, July 5th, the day after the so-called Independence Day for wealthy landowners in these United States? Do you understand why I feel the way I feel? Why on a day that many people are enjoying themselves, boating, drinking, barbecuing, for me, I spent my day reading. I spent my day studying. I spent my day trying to understand this country that I live in. Trying to understand why this country treats people that look like me the way they treat us. Trying to understand why they don't value the life of a man that looks like me. You might say, well, what do you mean they don't value? Oh, it's proven. It's proven. I tell a woman, if I'm coaching her, pay attention to a man's actions. Don't just fall for his words. Well, guess what I'm doing as a citizen of these United States? I'm paying attention to your actions. You know, you can talk all you want. You can say what you want to. But how are you acting when it comes to people that look like me? Why is it that a conversation about reparations is a conversation that's difficult to have? Why is it that we have to come to the table with all the facts and try to prove our case when it's right here in the textbooks? It's all documented in the Library of Congress, the ills and the injustice that has been perpetrated against people that look like me. And then you have the audacity to be offended if I say I don't celebrate, that I can't be joyous, that I can't fully connect with this holiday. Give me my opinion. You want to respect me? You want to start respecting me? Give me my opinion then. I'm not taking away yours. I'm not taking away your ability to celebrate. God bless you. I just want you to understand why I don't. And this is why I don't. Almost 500 years of injustice. Almost 500 years of dehumanization. The consequences have been dire. And these are ills that have not just been perpetrated on the land of these United States of America, but these are ills that have been perpetrated across the world. These are ills that have been perpetrated in the West Indies of the Caribbean. These are ills that have been perpetrated in South America. Our brothers and sisters in Brazil have suffered genocide at the hands of their captors. These are ills that were suffered right on the shores of the motherland, of the continent. My ancestor, who came from Burkina Faso, God bless him, marched 800 to 900 miles down to the southern coast of West Ghana, only to be dragged into a river called Anson Manso, where he was forced to clean off so he could be sold on a block and thrown into a dungeon. A dungeon where people were suffering from disease. People were suffering from starvation. People were standing in excrement and urine and blood and sweat that went up to their ankles. It's proven. This is history. Only to survive. Only to survive the ills of that. By the way, he was there for months. Imagine. Just imagine that level of cruelty. Not for one day, but for months. Before, when he does see the light of day, it's blinding his eyes. Maybe some hope begins to enter into his heart, into his spirit, into his soul, only to be shackled, put on a ship, and strapped down in the hull of a ship for a 2 to 3 month journey across the Atlantic, where he would watch his brothers and sisters die, where he would hear the moans and agony of other people, where he suffered sickness, disease, diarrhea, vomiting, bitten by rodents, crossed over by rodents, the psychological horror. To be brought to a foreign country, a foreign land, where he is then sold as property. A man that was once free sold his property. Name changed. I don't know my name. Harris is an English name. Think about that. Here in America, you have black folk whose very identity has been scarred. I don't know my paternal ancestors' native language. Sure as hell wasn't French. I don't know his name. I don't know his God. I don't know. Maybe I know his God. Maybe that's the relationship I have today, but I don't even know. I don't know. Sold into slavery. And all his offspring become slaves. Only to be supposedly freed in 1863 to endure the injustice of the Black Code of Jim Crow. To be a free man, by the way, who can't even protect the people that he loves. Think about that right now. Think about the inability to protect your wife, to protect your daughter. Someone could come in and do to them what they wish. And you know that anything you do to stop it is a death sentence. Guess what? Some of us died. Some of us took the sentence. Some of us, we had to watch as the dignity was taken from those that we love. As the dignity was taken from our daughters. You ask me why I don't celebrate? Why I'm not in a celebratory mood? Our brother Frederick Douglass. Our brother Frederick Douglass, some years ago, was asked to speak on the 4th of July. In his speech, he even said that it's a form of mockery that you would even ask me to speak today. But when he did speak, this is what he said. This is what he said. Hey, Pat. We're going to go out on Lift Every Voice and Sing. Look that up for me. This is what Brother Douglass said. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? This is what I'm going to say. What to the black man and woman is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham. Your boasted liberty, an unholy license, your national greatness, your swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence. Let me pause. Your denunciation of tyrants, America, sickens me. How dare you? How dare you talk about other countries? It's hypocritical. Look at our defense budget. Look how much money we spend everywhere else when we have these type of problems at home. It's hypocritical. You say, why are you so upset? Because I love this country. Because I appreciate the privileges and the blessings that it has given me. And guess what? At the same time, this country is hypocritical. How dare you? Nah, this is more than preaching, brother. It's more. How dare you? Yeah, we go off, we criticize other countries, we label other countries. We stand on their soil and we make them wrong when they defend their land. It's hypocritical. I'm sorry. Frederick Douglass. I'm not sorry. I'm sorry for pausing the great brother's speech. That's what I'm sorry for. But I'm not sorry about what I said. Your denunciation of tyrants, your brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality are hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgiving, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy. A thin veil to cover up crimes, which would disgrace a nation of savages. Say that again. It's nothing but a thin veil, by the way, that we can see through. A thin veil to cover up crimes, which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of the United States at this very hour. At this very hour. Go where you may. Search where you will. Roam through all the monarchies and despotisms of the old world and the new. Travel through South America. Search out every abuse. And when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of the everyday practices of this nation. And you will say with me that for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival. America reigns without a rival. We reap what we sow on an individual basis, on a generational basis, on a familiar basis, also on a national basis. America, you've been found wanting. The Honorable Minister said it yesterday. The question is, when will you repent? America, you've wronged me. You've wronged my forefathers. You've wronged my ancestors. When? When will you repent? When will you make amends? It's not until you make amends. It's not until you make amends that I will celebrate. And so this year, next year, and for the years to come, when you notice I'm not participating, when you notice that I'm not celebrating, you understand why. And just know that there will be no celebration until there's been some repentance. There'll be no celebration until there's an apology. And there'll be no celebration for me until there are reparations. God bless you guys. From the bottom of my heart, God bless the United States of America. Because this is where I live. This is my home. This is the home of my son. And every time I begin to board a plane, when I'm in the homeland of Africa, I feel this pain. Because you're supposed to be home, but you're not. Don't feel like home. For those of you who see the tears, it's because I ask myself every day, if this is a place I can raise my son. I ask myself every day, God, is it time to go? And that's just a piece of my pain. For all of you listening, God bless you. Thank you.